is two elements. When we say publishing to a journal, that's really the ultimate output. But to get there, there's a whole school between to get to there, which is presenting at conferences professionally. So one gets to the next. You're going to see this in a little bit of the process of how this works. For some of you, this may be new. You haven't heard of how this, but this is what our goal is today. So first of all, I want to go to conference paper presentations. And these are not, to make it clear, these are not your fun little workshops where you go and just learn the coolest little popular topic that's out there. These are professional conferences in your field. So for example, in nonprofit management, my students, you find conferences that are the professional conferences in your field where the disseminating of new knowledge takes place. Similar to organizational leadership, the International Leadership Association or others becomes that. For me personally, in my own writing craft, it's the American Sociological Association. So for me to get accepted to present at the ASA is significant to the growth of my own professional credentials in the field. Beyond that, there's all sorts of other ancillary conferences that relate to your field. But the first thing is for you to become familiar with what are the conferences that are in your profession. A lot of people just pick and choose with what they do. Well, it's important for you to become familiar with them. My wife and I, when we first started into our academic careers, this was going to some conferences and just kind of getting a feel for what these academic conferences are like. So the first step may be going to a presentation. Bit of an overview. Presenting at a conference does these things. First of all, it helps you to engage peer review at an entry level. This is that whole principle of academic humility. You've probably had it from professors that say, this is a bad paper. I had my experience with an Argentine prof that I thought it was a brilliant paper on post-colonial society. He says, if you choose to write a dissertation, you better work on your English prose, coming from an Argentinian professor. So it helps you deal with this idea of rejection acceptance. Second, this is resume building. It was interesting to me a few years ago, probably 7 years ago, I wanted to apply to work at the UN. And I thought I had lots of good background, nonprofit experience, and so on and so forth. But to get first past the post, one of the things was conference presentations or professional presentations, because that's what the UN does. I realized I didn't have anything in my cachet, that my experience and practice was irrelevant to the UN. So you could have been in an NGO doing all the greatest waterworks somewhere. It was irrelevant if you wanted to apply for this particular job because the criteria was also professional presentation over top of this. I think some of us, we forget this because it's all about the practice. It's all about praxis. It's all about practice. But to advance in the field, this becomes part of it. Second or third, professional networking. It becomes a place where you can network well with people, meet people, find out how they write, find out what presentations are like. It's a critique of your work in a generally positive environment, particularly if you get into a consortium or into a round table. And I've been in a few of these at the ASA, where you're with colleagues. Some of them are professors, some of them are grad students, but the idea of collegiality is this round table kind of thing. Into this writing workshop, we've tried to incorporate some of that into your tutoring sessions where there's these round table kind of discussions. But it also it's positive, positive environment. And seeing what else is out there. So what is this professional track I speak of? You write college papers, moves to conference papers, then if you're moving on to a thesis-based MA or to a PhD, you write your seminal paper, which is a thesis or a dissertation. Nonprofit students, you write a capstone thesis. This is your seminal project. That then often will output sometimes academic books, even popular books, or journal papers. So even the fact you're doing this intensive research in a capstone project provides you research tools to produce conference papers. Decide what is your professional interest, and then the first step is to become a member of that professional association. Because when you start putting your curriculum vitae or your resume together, what professional associations are you a part of? So become a member, invest some money, right, in these kind of things. Become a member, and note subgroups in the larger association. Matt is really good with this with the Association of Fundraising Professionals, where you got the large, huge organization, which I wish I could go, their national conference in Vancouver in April, but he's heavily engaged in the local chapter in Philly, right? Similarly in the ASA, there's the national conference, which brings together 7,000 to 8,000 people, but there's the local conference, the Eastern Sociological Conference, that brings together about 300 to 400. So sometimes there's subgroups, or even within the larger group, other people that are in your particular affinity field. This is the way you get to know what is being written, what are people talking about, how do I need to align myself with my craft within what they are saying. Observe the topics of the paper presentations that get accepted. Each conference has a certain spin. Each subgroup has a certain spin. And certain things they like. And this was no more pointed to me this summer, the difference between the Academy Management and the ASA on economics. Academy Management, very business, and how do we manage business? ASA is how do we protest against the system, right? So you got to get used to this kind of language, and each conference has this. And consider the approach that you want to use. Paper presentation, which is actually you standing at the front and presenting a paper. A round table, which is a good way to get accepted first. It's a topical round table with 3 or 4 people that have professional papers on that topic. And so you basically critique each other, and then there's a round table moderator that's received all the papers ahead of time and has read them all and can speak very well about each one of the papers and moderate a discussion of critique. At the ASA, they go a step further. You must actually submit your paper into your roundtable, so everyone who's in your roundtable has access to your paper, 2 months to 3 months in advance of the conference. And then we have the submission panel, which is 4 people, usually, sometimes 5, who will present about 7 minutes each on a certain topic, but it can go much further than that. Depends on the length of the panel. And then there's question and answer from the floor to the panel. I've been using this panel format in the symposiums I've been designing because I think it's a good entry-level place for our students because they have other people who are at that table. But it is intense because you have 7 minutes and it better be short and good. And the final what you need to then find is what is the submission schedule. Understand if it's a quality peer-reviewed conference, they're usually working 6 to 8 months in advance of the actual conference, and sometimes more. The ASA conference is in August. The submission shut down on January 10th, right? So you're working about a year in advance of a conference. So this isn't, I think I want to go to this conference. No, you're thinking in advance of this kind of process, all right? So then, how do you submit? You look for submission criteria. You create an abstract. And we'll talk a little bit later about what I call an informative abstract, or what's called an informative abstract is usually what you do, and submit according to the conference guidelines. And then you await your response. Here's a practical example of how it works. You submit your thing and you look in a large conference, where are all the places I possibly could get this thing accepted, right? And so that's what I did. I saw this one paper I had, and I submitted it to 6 different sections or systems in the American Sociological Association. And this is what you get back. Rejected, 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 accepted. Right? And usually what's happening is they're tossing these around back and forth within each other. If it's a good quality paper, it often will find a place to land, but it may not be where you thought. Paper I thought should have landed in the sociology of sport, it landed in social psychology. Because they thought this was a fascinating study. So you don't totally know. Any questions so far? Writing an abstract then. Descriptive abstract is a short description of the actual larger abstract of about less than 100 words. An informative abstract is what is going to be your project you're going to do. Is a short, powerful statement about a longer work. It isn't a copy of what is in your paper, but it outlines your whole paper in 250 words or less. All right, how many have written an abstract before? Okay, right. This is apparently a continuing thing we need to work on and to get better and better at abstracts. But this is core to your first step in. What is it? Citation of the source. It then has a thesis statement. What's your main point you want to make? What is a brief summary of what your findings that you come out of this thing? Why is this important? Why do we need to know this? Does this actually add anything to our field or not? And finally, this is interesting. So there's a strategy here. Some say put findings last. Others say put it first. I recommend you if you can find out in journals that have been published in this organization or other papers that have been at a conference, look the way people do them. There's a debate that's out there on whether you put your findings that are unique first or you put it last. And I think it all depends on who ends up landing there. You start looking at it, and some people want to read you 2 lines next, right? Or some will read the whole thing. Any other comments or abstract?
Citation of source, what do you mean by that?
A citation of source, what is the paper this is coming from? So what is your paper? So you cite, my paper is how to write properly on Thursday nights. That's the source, right? Then you go on to describe it. So you cite the actual source of the paper. All right, now how to distill your work. I like these 2 things. This is what you're talking about. Tomorrow, Samino, who's a pro at this, will go into the whole editing thing and copy editing. He was able to convince me to knock out about 12,000 words out of an article I thought was beautiful. So be it. This is part of it. It's the distilling your work down to publishable quality. One interesting approach is reverse outlining. Is instead of going from front to back, outline it from back to front. All right, and write your main outline and then craft your abstract that way, because your findings are at the back. But then you have to do an outline, so it's got to be distilled in 250 words. Others think, or the other one might be cut and paste. This is important. This is important. This is important, and then you rewrite what you just cut and pasted. What you don't want to get caught doing, apparently, is simply cutting and pasting your paper here to there. Then they knew that you were not doing the work of writing a correct abstract. Because it's a more powerful statement about your paper than your actual text. The text of your paper should be more detailed and stronger. Yeah.
Could you repeat or review again the reverse outlining? I didn't get that.
Okay. You know how when you write an outline, introduction, my thesis, my hypothesis, my research method, my findings, and my conclusions. Well, conclusions, findings, research methods, lit review, and so on. So what is at the front of the thing is why this is important. Your conclusion often summarizes it.
And you're also deconstructing your paper.
Yeah.
Because you're taking what you have instead of taking an outline and expanding it, you're compressing it back.
And some of the people who comment on this reverse outline, they say it forces you to knock out stuff that don't matter, because what matters is usually at the end. This then again is the debate whether you have a very exciting opening to your paper or your abstract, this is brilliant, or do you just get to it? I found that. Right? Any other questions? All right, we're not going to go through this. I thought this, Phil Koopman had an interesting layout of some other kinds of processes to abstract writing, but I want to move on to the next. This will be on the web after our conference. Publishing to a journal. Any other questions on publishing to a conference and an abstract? Okay. The other thing is not mentioned here on the conference. You look for what's called a call for papers. Okay. Each conference will release a call for papers, which describes what this particular theme of the conference is, and you need to then submit according to that. I submit call for papers for a sports symposium. I submit a call. You submit a call for papers for I think you did for metrics, or was that just workshop?
That was just workshop.
That's just workshop. That's a little bit different. That's what's called invited lectures. It's a whole other, much more high. But there will be a call for papers. How many of you have never seen a call for papers? Okay, it could be called an RFP, which is a request for proposals. What I'm going to have you do in your work time is you're going to get up on your laptop, you're going to find a conference, you're going to look to see if you can find a call for papers. And I'll show you on the web here as well. I get them consistently now from the NASSS. I think they must be desperate for papers, but that is the process. Publishing to a journal. Okay, this is the deep part of academic craft, and I have to be honest, I am just engaging this. Normally, this at the highest level of academic journals is post-PhD, where you're completed. I'm still finishing the last part of my PhD. That being said, I've had a few things published, which is good, and with the good help of my editor that you'll meet tomorrow, Richard Cimino, thrilled that he was able to forward one of my papers to actually accept by Indiana University Press. So I'm still emerging in some of this. So I'd be happy to have any input from any faculty maybe here who want to talk about this. But what's the basic idea? Why do we talk about this? And why do I want to make this clear? I had a student of mine a couple of years ago who was a professional business person. She said there's no need for this. And she made sure that everybody in the class understood that what I was talking about in that producing information for students that you need to build your CV. I don't need a CV, I need a resume that sells me, right? Well, the reality is, if you're going to move into real professional ranks, the pure sale resume is okay, but having actual verifiable work you have done that's been peer reviewed, which means they've accepted that this is good work, advances you in the field. Again, at the UN, that's what advances you, because if they have that, this person thinks at a certain level, other people think of that, so published articles do this. It is in academia critical. And I would argue, for anyone, others, it's a good idea to really start thinking about getting your work published, to move you to another level, because it steps you out of the realm of those who just graduated with a degree and then went on to work. Does this make sense? Okay, but it takes a lot of work. Okay, so it's critical to academics in building professional credibility. And if you want to teach in my nonprofit program, I usually look at this. It's not the only thing I look at, but basically, if I see that you've done some work in this field, then I know that you have academic veracity, that you're not just a practitioner. I teach marketing. I get quite a few resumes from people who, I'm a marketing person, I'd love to teach in your program, but actually look at what they read and what they talk about, you realize they haven't actually done any academic work at all in marketing. They just learned how to sell stuff, right? But academic marketing is a whole other field. So that's what this does. And it's also important to professional resume building, which is what I talked about in the United Nations. So I argue this is a powerful way to improve your exposure in professional fields to a wider audience than you otherwise would get. We can get sucked into our world with our organizations, but there is a broader professional realm where you can make connections for this. So that's the purpose of this discussion. All right? Let's go fairly fast over this process. What's the difference between being academic and journalistic? Now you hear academic journal, well that's a journal, right? Well, when we're saying academic, it means it's professional research, it has a technical style, it has defined professional audience and topics and research, it has peer review, which means other professionals in the field have looked at this stuff and said, this is good, which that's critical, anonymous peer review, right? And it adds to the field, it has its purpose. Journalistic writing, as good it is, and we need to learn this as well, which is going to be talked about tomorrow, is journalistic style writing, is, narrative based on issues, popular audience, storytelling, controversial, often biased opinion to get a result. No official peer review, more usually peer review with those people in the field that like this kind of journalism. And its purpose varies, but ultimately, I would argue, journalistic writing is sales. If your stuff doesn't get out there and people want to listen to it, it doesn't get published. Academic journals might have that agenda, but not quite as much. That's a bit of a simple statement to make. And I would go beyond that to argue that journalistic writing has far more many other purposes, like newsletters and so on and so forth. So be sure you frame what I said. Okay, so what's the right journal? What's interesting is 70% of articles look for an appropriate journal. You say, I'm going to look around to see which article I like, or which journal fits with what I already wrote. I wrote this good paper, I want to adapt it and shift it and change it to publishing. Interestingly, 30% of people target a journal. They look at the journal, and what does the journal write about, what's its essence, and they look at what's the best approach to get published in this journal. What's interesting about this is those that are in the 30% have a much, much higher positive result in getting their material published than those that try to match their paper to a journal, as opposed to read a journal and get involved in reading journals and then find how to adapt yourself to it. Two types, generalist journal would be for a large organization that has numbers of topics within a field. In my association, is the ASA journal. To get published in ASA, you're at the creme de la creme, because only publish 6 or 8 articles per journal out of the thousands of sociologists, but it's basically publishing the best of the best. But then there's niche journals. I have the City and Community Journal that I get regularly, which is part of my niche group, and now Consumption Journal has just gone online that are more niche. So you look at both. Ultimately, if you can get published in a generalist journal, it's an amazing feat, but niche journals help. Point is to review the aims and scopes of the journal. You look at, how many of you looked at one of these before? Okay. When you go online and look for a journal here, you'll actually see what is the scope and the aim of this journal, and you must fit in it. Here's the process of publishing. You have an idea, you choose the journal, you read back issues, you write a first draft, use a critical friend, test your humility now. Refine your ideas from what your critical friend says. Check for notes and for contributors. Like, make sure that everything that you've looked at is referenced and cited. Finally, proofread and submit. That's kind of this cycle. Any comments on that? Pretty standard approach, the way it works. But how does a peer review process work? Every journal has an editor who is the cache, and often it's the editor's assistant who actually receives all the articles. They then send these, if they see this meets the aims and scopes of the journal, and if might do a quick scan that this thing is decent, they'll then send it to 3 reviewers that are anonymous, and the name is taken off of the article. And these 3 reviewers read it, and then they'll come back either with minor changes or major changes, or it might get rejected. But you know, some say that a good editor will already have been able to reject a paper that's not going to get published based on aims and scopes and quality. If you've been reading the journals, you would already know what it should look like. Yes?
My question is, if your paper is rejected, would they give you like reasons why? Like just tell specific reasons why?
They usually give some critique. Yeah.
Some critique,
There's a debate there whether you should ask the editor for more information and get critical. Well, I did this, I did that. That would be a great question to ask Richard. He goes through this all the time. Because there's a relationship, and you don't want to create a bad relationship among editors because they might speak to each other.
Hans, I think I was going to be good to answer it, but I think several things that I've seen is you can get rejected for several different reasons. One is because it's not in the scope of the journal, so that's pretty quick. As Hans said, the editor will just say, that'll be the feedback you get, it's not within the scope. But if there's something about the content, you may get the reviewer comments, right? And that's usually pretty standard, that you'll be able to see all the reviewer comments. And sometimes those are more detailed. But sometimes they only may be a couple sentences saying, you know, I don't agree with the argument, it's not logical, it hasn't done the reading in the field or something like that.
You see how grading by papers by professors is setting you up for this process. It ultimately leads to this. The 3 people you don't know, go after it. Minor changes, usually then you make those changes, the editor then you'll get published, resubmit it and publish. Major changes, you have a decision to make. Number 1, do I really do all these changes and cycle it back again? Because the problem here is your article can only be published in 1 journal. So you can't just all of a sudden send it out to 4 journals. So you're taking a chance here to send it back again and get it rejected again, and then it's known out there, well then she went to another journal. Or look for another journal based on the responses that are in your paper and find an editor with that, or start over on something else. Just say, okay, well that didn't work. Start over. It's okay, academic humility plays.
Hey Hans,
Yeah.
you might have said this, but when you said that you can only get it published in 1 journal, does that mean that you don't send it to like 2 publishers at one time?
No. 1. You work with 1. Copyright rules.
Question, is that different with internet journals? I'm just wondering, is that different? Have you noticed?
Not if it's an academic journal, it's the same kind of
Just,
thing.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, if it's what you're looking for, if it's a peer-reviewed journal, it's a legitimate journal. Interesting things come through the news school these days. I don't know if you've got any of this in your emails, but there's actually journal publishers out there now. Get your stuff published. And before you know it, you're into the thing, and then you realize this isn't actually a peer-reviewed journal at all. It's a way for them to create a journal to sell, and now they have your copyright. And that, you realize what they're doing, they're trying to entice young PhD students just to get their stuff out there. Yep.
Is it advisable to look for a peer-reviewed journal that publishes maybe 4 times or more a year versus those journals that publish like twice a year? Doesn't it increase the likelihood that they'll be
Yeah, well, it depends on the size of the journal, right? There's some journals, like the Association for Sociology and Religion, is a smaller journal, publishes once a year, but its constituency is 300 people. So you could have somebody that publishes 4 times a year, but their constituency is 5,000 or 10,000. I think you got to figure out, like to get published in the Academy of Management, you know, it's massive, the group group you're publishing. So I think that you have to look at both. It would seem if it publishes 4 times a year, so yes. I think I'll say where's the journal placed in the world of journals?
And also I think it depends on who you want to share your ideas with, right? And as Hans was saying, if you're in particular conferences and the conference is really in your field, many times through the networking, if you can identify who has influence in terms of getting things published in the journal, they may actually ask you to submit an article in that way. And if that's the audience that you want to basically share your ideas with them, no matter how many times it comes out.
Okay, these are some simple points that are hints. Look for articles that have been accepted before. Aims and scopes, check it again. Follow the extent of submissions. Look at what the article-specific instructions, from everything from font to the way you want the bibliography. You'll learn this from the syllabi that you get in your classes. Now it moves to a whole nother level, but it's the same concept. Then quote from this was interesting, quote from previous articles in your journal. In other words, you're in conversation with other peers. I fell into this with one of my submissions that Ammerman came back and said Ammerman is not mentioned in this particular vein under faith and Nietzsche's. Well, turned out she's one of my anonymous reviewers, and it's her book. So, major hole, we were able to save it by putting it back in, but there you go. That's the kind of idea. What's interesting, though, is many papers are rejected. This is what you were saying, partially on poor presentation. It just looks bad. It's not professional. The text, the prose, the citing, the appearance isn't of the level in a journal. So this moves your writing to a whole nother level than it would be in a typical term paper that we might have had at Eastern University. And we're trying to improve the writing. We know when we're in graduate school, we're improving our writing. When you're out there, it moves to another level. So look to craft your writing to meet to overcome the poor presentation blend. All right, finally, top 10 reasons for rejection, Oxford Review Education. Sent to the wrong journal, does not fit scopes and aims. It's not a journal article, it's journalistic writing. It's too long or too short. Poor regard to conventions of a journal or the conventions of academic writing generally. An editor can see very quickly, is this actually look like a journal article for our journal? And will not send something that doesn't meet that criteria out to the reviewers. So usually what you're getting with a reviewer is theory type stuff and responses. But the actual look of the thing is at the editor, and they'll reject it. Yes?
I find it interesting, this is almost exactly a tweak, one of those. What any magazine, professional journal, whatever will tell you when you submit something to them.
Yeah.
You know, it's not what they do. You know, it doesn't. It's not their kind of article. It's too long. It's too short. It's not. Doesn't follow the conventions of what they typically do. And all you got to do is read their thing,
Read their
and
books.
you can find out what it is.
Exactly. Read their journals.
So excuse me, are you saying that this is the type of critique you would receive when they return it, when they send the
Yeah, I
return?
mean, even if you're writing for not an academic journal, but a professional, I'd call it a journal or something, you know, it's the same stuff. Yeah, as anytime you're writing for somebody else in a magazine format or something.
Bad style, grammar, punctuation, poor English. I found this fascinating, not corrected by an English speaker. I guess there's a plethora of articles coming out of China that have really poor English idiom. And so some of the major journals are starting to push back now. They may have great research, but it should have proper English idiom. So if you have a tendency to write in kind of popular English, make sure you get into academic English. Fails to say anything of significance. Makes no new contribution or states what's already obvious. People like to drink have ice cubes when they have the flu. I studied that at a conference, right? You see what I'm saying? not properly contextualized to the audience. This is interesting. Is it an international journal versus a parochial journal to a specific group? This is a trap many fall into, that they realize internationals submitting to some journal that's focused on issues in the Northeast of the United States. Or, for example, if you have a very strong ethnic or religious topic journal that has a very small readership, and you talk all international on it, this becomes something you have to work with. Similarly, understanding that people are going to read this in many different places, so you can't be so parochial that it's non-readable to people outside of the actual readership of the journal. Poor theoretical reference. What this means, it has, it looks like it's your own ideas, and you don't have a lit review. And finally, or scrappily, I like the English language, scrappily presented and clearly not proofread. Right? Short bits and pieces. And finally, libellous, unethical, or rude. All right? You can look at some of these on your own if rejected, if published, some things that you can use to promote yourself out there. All right? Supposed to split at 8:30 for tutoring, correct? Now, did you all bring the best paper you've ever written? Okay, here's what your writing craft is going to be. I want you to take your paper and, using reverse outlining, I want you to create a 250-word abstract that will be, this is your first stab at submitting that paper to a conference